The Meridian Oaks Medical Center had 42 floors of glass and steel, rising above the corner of Bay and Wellesley in downtown Toronto, and on a Tuesday morning in late October, the lobby smelled like fresh flowers and money. Harlow didn't belong there. That was the first thing Constance decided when she looked up from the reception desk and saw the young woman pushing through the revolving door. The woman was maybe 26, 27. She wore a canvas jacket that had seen too many winters, dark jeans, and a pair of worn-out boots that left small wet prints on the polished marble floor. No briefcase, no visitor lanyard. She had a paper coffee cup in one hand and a tote bag over her shoulder with the strap fraying at the seam. Her hair was pulled back in a loose knot, a few strands escaping around her face. She looked like she might have walked in from a bus stop. She walked toward the reception desk with the quiet certainty of someone who knew where she was going. Constance set down her pen. Constance had been the front reception manager at Meridian Oaks for 11 years. She knew this building the way a person knows their own home. Which corridors got cold in January? Which elevator opens slowly on the 4th floor? Which board members liked to be called by their first names and which ones didn't? She had a sharp instinct for who belonged in this space and who was about to ask her for directions to a different hospital entirely. "Can I help you?" Constance said. The tone was the kind that carries more than 2 syllables. The young woman stopped at the desk. She glanced up at the directory board behind Constance's shoulder, then back. "I have a meeting on 31, she said. Her voice was even, unhurried. Constance looked at her, at the jacket, at the tote bag, at the coffee cup. "A meeting," Constance repeated. "Yes, with the board." Constance almost laughed. She didn't, because 11 years had also trained her in the art of the controlled smile. The one that communicates you are very clearly confused, and I am being patient with you about it. "The board of directors," Constance said, "meets on 31. That floor requires keycard access and an approved visitor entry." She paused. "Do you have a keycard?" "No." "Then I'll need to see some identification, your full name, and the name of whoever invited you. I can call up to verify." The young woman set her coffee cup on the edge of the desk. She reached into her tote bag and produced a small leather card holder. She slid a card across the desk. Constance looked at it. Harlow Meridian, Director of Strategic Development, Meridian Oaks Medical Center. Constance looked up. The young woman, Harlow, was watching her with an expression that was impossible to read. Not cold, not triumphant, just patient. "This could be," Constance began. "It could be," Harlow agreed pleasantly, "or you could call 31 and ask for Bernard Cho. He'll confirm. I'll wait." Constance did not call. She issued a temporary visitor badge and said nothing else. Harlow picked up her coffee cup and walked to the elevator. The problem was that Constance was not the kind of person who let things go. By noon she had mentioned the incident to 2 colleagues. Framed, of course, as a concern. A woman like that, with no keycard, no formal dress, showing up with a card that claimed she was a director? You had to be careful. The building had protocols for a reason. Constance was simply doing her job. By 2 o'clock, the version circulating among the front-facing staff was slightly different. A woman had showed up claiming to be on the board. Constance had nearly called security. The card might have been fake. None of that was what Constance had actually said, but stories have a way of finding the shape that fits the space they travel through. At 3:15, Harlow came back through the lobby. She was heading toward the exit, tote bag on her shoulder, a folder tucked under her arm. Constance was behind the desk. There was a junior receptionist named Bridget standing nearby, and 2 men from facilities who had stopped to talk near the security column. Constance stepped out from behind the desk. "Excuse me," she didn't lower her voice. "I need to ask you to come back to the desk, please." Harlow stopped. She turned around. She looked at Constance with an expression that had shifted slightly, still calm, but attentive now. "Present." "Is something wrong?" Harlow asked. "I've had some concerns raised about your badge," Constance said. "The card you showed me earlier. I've been told by building security that we've had incidents of individuals presenting fraudulent credentials to access restricted floors." She straightened her jacket. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me while we verify your entry today with our security team." The lobby had gone quiet. Bridget had stopped what she was doing. The 2 men from facilities were watching. Harlow looked at Constance for a moment. "You already called 31, Harlow said. This morning, you spoke to Bernard Cho's assistant, who confirmed my name on the visitor log. Building security operates separately from floor administration. I know. I signed the policy that created that distinction. A pause. I'm sorry? Constance said. The visitor security policy, Harlow said. The one that went into effect last February. I was part of the working group that drafted it. She tilted her head slightly. My name's on page 3. Constance said nothing. I have a board debrief at 4, Harlow said. I'm going to get a sandwich and come back. If your security team wants to speak with me, tell them to call Bernard directly. He has my number. She walked out through the revolving door. The lobby was very quiet for a moment. Then Bridget went back to her screen. The men from facilities resumed their conversation. Constance walked back behind the desk and adjusted the already straight pen holder. Harlow came back at 3:50 with a sandwich and a second coffee. She badged through the side entrance this time, which she had every right to use, and took the stairs to the second floor before switching to the executive elevator. She had been doing this for 4 months, coming and going through this building in whatever she happened to be wearing, which was sometimes a blazer and sometimes not. She had learned early that her name alone was never enough to change what people decided to see when they looked at her. That didn't make it easy. She sat in the 31st floor boardroom while 7 people reviewed Q3 projections on a screen, and she thought about what Constance had said. The carefully public way she had said it. The timing of it, with an audience assembled. The mention of security, the word fraudulent, chosen with precision. Harlow had been on the receiving end of that kind of precision before. In boardrooms and on construction sites and in restaurants and in lobbies like the one downstairs. The specifics changed. The structure was always the same. The message was, you do not look like you belong here, and I am going to make that legible to everyone in the room. She had learned not to perform her reaction. That was the part people expected. Embarrassment or anger, or the particular brightness of someone who has just been handed a humiliation and is trying to pretend they haven't noticed. She had given people that satisfaction before. When she was younger, she didn't anymore. She ate half her sandwich before the meeting started. Bernard Cho sat across from her and went over the Westlake acquisition timeline with the same focused gravity he brought to every meeting. Nobody in this room looked at her canvas jacket. They knew her. Here she was, just Harlow. The hard part was that everywhere else, she was still the woman who had walked in from a bus stop. The meeting ended at 5:30. Harlow rode the elevator down alone. She stood in the lobby for a moment, adjusting the strap on her tote bag, not going anywhere in particular, just standing. Constance was still at the desk. The afternoon shift ran until 6. Harlow walked to the desk. I wanted to check in, she said, about this morning. Constance looked up. Something moved behind her expression, not quite recognition, not quite apology, just calculation. Of course, Constance said carefully. I want to understand, Harlow said. When you stopped me this afternoon, the badge concerned the security mention. Was that a standard protocol? Something you do routinely for all visitors? Constance straightened slightly. We have an obligation to maintain building security. Sure. Harlow nodded. Do you do that in the lobby, publicly for all visitors whose credentials have already been verified? Or was there something specific about me that prompted it? A long pause. I was acting out of an abundance of caution, Constance said. That's one way to put it. Harlow was quiet for a moment. I'm going to be in this building regularly. I'll be interacting with a lot of people on a lot of floors. And I care about the culture here. I think it matters. How people feel when they walk through this space. She picked up her bag. I'd like us to be able to move forward well. I think that's possible. But I want you to understand what happened today and why it was a problem. She left without waiting for a response. Harlow had not come from a family connected to Meridian Oaks Medical Center. That was a fact she knew people assumed, because it seemed like the only explanation that made sense to them. The truth was more ordinary and more difficult. Her grandmother, Ruth, had immigrated to Canada from Jamaica in 1971 and spent 30 years as a home care worker in Scarborough. Her mother, Dawn, had worked 2 jobs through most of Harlow's childhood: a dental receptionist on weekdays, a grocery cashier on weekends, and had died of a preventable cardiac event when Harlow was 19. in a waiting room in a hospital that was underfunded and overcrowded and too far from where they lived. Harlow had been in her first year of a business administration program at Ryerson when it happened. She had transferred into health system management the following semester and finished with a distinction. She had gone straight into a graduate program, written a thesis on equitable access in urban healthcare infrastructure, and spent 3 years in a consulting role that took her through 6 provinces and had her in and out of institutions like Meridian Oaks, carrying clipboards and wearing the same worn boots she'd had since second year. She had been recruited to Meridian Oaks by the outgoing chair, who had read her thesis and wanted someone who understood both the numbers and what the numbers represented. She was 28 years old. She was the youngest director in the organization's history. She had approved the security visitor policy that currently governed this lobby. She had also, in a meeting 2 weeks ago, signed off on the capital allocation plan that would fund the new low-income patient navigation program on the 3rd and 4th floors, the one that had been stalled for 2 years waiting for budget approval. None of that was visible in her canvas jacket. She understood that. She just thought other people should have to reckon with it. Constance did not sleep well that Tuesday night. She replayed the conversation at the desk, the way Harlow had spoken, measured and direct, without accusation but without softness either. The question she had asked, was that a standard protocol or something specific about me? Constance had worked at Meridian Oaks for 11 years. In that time, she had stopped, redirected, or questioned hundreds of visitors. She ran through them now, in the dark of her bedroom, trying to remember. She was looking for an example of someone else, someone whose credentials had already been confirmed, that she had publicly flagged for a secondary security check. She couldn't find one. She lay there for a while. Then she turned on the lamp and got a glass of water and sat at her kitchen table and thought about the policy page. Harlow had mentioned, page 3, a name on a working group document. The quiet authority of someone who didn't need to prove anything, and who had simply told the truth. Constance thought about the word she had chosen in the lobby that afternoon, fraudulent. She had chosen it carefully, she realized now. She had wanted it to land. She had wanted Harlow to feel the weight of it, in front of Bridget and the facilities men and anyone else who happened to be watching. She asked herself why she had wanted that. She didn't arrive at an answer she liked. 2 days later, Constance requested a meeting with her manager, a soft-spoken man named Terrence, who ran operations for the main floor. She sat across from him and told him what had happened, including the version she wasn't proud of, the public challenge, the words she had used, the way she had timed it. Terrence listened. He didn't interrupt. When she was finished, he said, "Has Harlow filed a complaint?" "Not that I'm aware of," Constance said. "She may still." He clasped his hands on the desk. "I want to be direct with you. What you're describing is a serious lapse in both professionalism and judgment. The lobby is a public space. That kind of exchange has consequences for how people experience this building." He paused. "Do you understand why it happened?" "I'm trying to," Constance said. "That's the right place to start." She was placed on a structured performance improvement process. The terms were specific: mandatory training in equity and professional conduct, a reviewed 6-month period, and a formal note in her file. She kept her job. She kept her desk. She greeted visitors with exactly the same efficiency she always had. But something had changed in the way she carried herself at the reception counter. A new attentiveness. A second look before the first word. What Constance hadn't known, what she couldn't have known, was that Harlow had not, in fact, filed a complaint. She had thought about it on the walk to the sandwich place that afternoon. She had turned it over during the board debrief, half listening to the Westlake projections. She had made a decision in the elevator on the way down. She went to the desk instead. She asked the questions she actually wanted answered. Was this a protocol, or was this about me? She had learned that the question mattered. Not the outcome, the question. The willingness to make someone sit with what they had done and name it for what it was. In her experience, consequences rarely changed people. Being seen usually did. Not always, not in every case, but often enough that she had made it a practice. Bridget, who had been standing nearby during the lobby confrontation, applied to the patient navigation program on the 3rd floor the following month. She had wanted to work in a more direct patient-facing role for 2 years, but had hesitated, convinced she was somehow not qualified enough. She had watched the exchange in the lobby and found herself thinking about it afterward. Not about Constance, but about Harlow. The way she had held her ground without raising her voice. The way she had known exactly what she'd contributed to this building and hadn't flinched when someone tried to make her doubt it. Bridget got the role. She started in January. Harlow's navigation program opened on a Thursday in March, 6 months after the conversation in the lobby. There was no ceremony. The third-floor waiting area simply had new signage, 2 additional staff members, and a small table near the entrance, with a community information board covered in local services, translated into 7 languages. Harlow walked through on the opening morning before the staff arrived. She stood in the space for a few minutes. The new chairs, the light coming through the north-facing windows, the board covered in small index cards and pamphlets, and notices she hadn't approved because she wasn't supposed to approve them, because the community was supposed to put them there. She thought about her mother, about a waiting room in a different hospital, in a different part of the city, where nobody had handed Ruth a pamphlet, or connected Dawn to a navigator, or explained that there was a cardiac specialist 3 blocks away who took her insurance. Harlow had been trying to build the thing that hadn't existed when it mattered most. She stood there for a while, then she put on her jacket. The canvas one, because it was March, and the building was not quite warm enough yet, and took the elevator down to the lobby. Constance was at the desk when she came through. Their eyes met. Constance gave a small, precise nod. Harlow nodded back. Then she pushed through the revolving door and stepped out onto Bay Street, where the city was already moving, already loud, already entirely indifferent to who she was, or what she'd built inside that building of glass and steel. She was fine with that. The people it was built for would find it. They always did when the door was actually open.